My daughter punched me in the hospital. Her husband tried to unplug my life support for insurance. They say you should go toward the light. But that night, the only light I saw was the green one blinking on my life support machine. And my son-in-law's hand was reaching to turn it off. That's the sound I will never forget. Beep, beep. It was the rhythm of my life, and the ticking clock counting down to my death. That night, in the sterile cold of the hospital room, I pretended to be asleep. My eyes were closed, but every other sense was screaming. The sheets felt like ice. The air tasted of antiseptic and fear. I was a prisoner in my own body, waiting. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. And then I heard it. Footsteps. So soft. You'd miss them if you weren't listening for your life. He was trying not to make a sound, the way a predator stalks its prey. The beeping of the machine was the only thing betraying the silence. Beep, beep. Each one felt like a drumbeat in my skull. He was getting closer. I didn't have to open my eyes to know. I could feel the air shift as he stood over my bed. I could smell the faint, cloying scent of his cheap cologne trying to cover the smell of sweat. Mark, my daughter's husband, the man who was supposed to be family. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, silent scream. Don't let the monitor show him. Don't let the rhythm change. I forced my breathing to stay even, a slow rise and fall, mimicking a deep sleep I was nowhere near. I felt his breath, warm and stale, on my cheek. He was leaning in, checking. Was I truly unconscious? A statue? A piece of furniture he was about to remove? A long moment passed. An eternity. Then he moved away from my face, toward the head of the bed, toward the wall, toward the switch. I heard a faint rustle of clothing. His hand, I imagined, hovering over the power outlet. I could almost feel the static in the air, the terrible energy of what he was about to do. My entire universe shrank to that one spot on the wall. My life was connected to it by a thin plastic cord. Then came the click. A small, insignificant sound, the kind of sound you hear 100 times a day. But this one was different. It was the sound of finality. The beeping stopped. Silence. A profound, terrifying silence that was louder than any noise. In that void, I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. This was it. This is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with a flick of a switch. But he made a mistake. He didn't just unplug my life support. He unplugged the entire power strip. And the backup alarm system had its own battery. That alarm saved my life. It screamed for me when I couldn't. But to understand why it had to ring, why my son-in-law was standing in the dark trying to murder me, we have to go back. Back to the moment the bomb started ticking. To understand the switch, you have to understand the cracks that came before it. The story doesn't start in that cold, sterile hospital room. It starts 2 weeks earlier in my warm kitchen. It was my wedding anniversary. Or it would have been. My husband, Richard, had been gone for 5 years, but I still marked the day. It felt like a way to keep him close, a small rebellion against the silence he'd left behind. I'd spent the afternoon baking his favorite cake, a simple lemon pound cake, nothing fancy. The citrusy smell filled the small house, a ghost of happier times. I cut a small slice for myself and put it on a plate, but the kitchen felt too big, too empty. I just wanted to share it with someone. I wanted to hear a voice that wasn't in my own head. So I picked up the phone and dialed Sarah, my daughter. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Mom, I'm kind of busy." There was no warmth in her voice, just impatience, the sound of a person swatting away a fly. I tried to push past it. "Hi, honey. I know. I won't keep you. I just, well, you know what day it is. I baked the lemon cake and was wondering if you and Mark wanted to come over for a slice. A heavy sigh on the other end. A cake? Mom, seriously? We have a million things going on. Mark's stressed. I'm stressed. We don't have time for cake. The words stung, each one a tiny, sharp needle. Oh, of course, I understand. It would just be for a little while. I miss you. We saw you last month, she snapped. Look, is that all? Is there something you actually need? Is something wrong? The question was so cold, so transactional, as if the only reason a mother would call her daughter was for an emergency. The idea of calling just to connect, just to share a memory, was an inconvenience she couldn't afford. The image of the little cake sitting on my counter suddenly seemed pathetic. No, honey, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Nothing is wrong. I was just calling. Okay, well, I have to go. My other line is ringing. We'll talk later. And then the line went dead. Not a goodbye, not an I love you, just nothing. The sudden, insulting silence of a disconnected call. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. That silence was worse than the one in the hospital room weeks later. It was the sound of a door being slammed in my heart. The lemon-scented air suddenly felt suffocating. My hands started to tremble, and the phone slipped from my fingers. I heard it clatter on the kitchen tiles, a sharp, ugly sound in the quiet house. My knees just gave out. The strength vanished from my legs, and the floor rushed up to meet me. That was the first crack in the foundation. I just didn't know the whole thing was about to crumble. The first thing I remember is a persistent beeping, a sound that drilled into my consciousness before I even knew where I was. Then came the smell, that sterile, chemical scent that belongs only to hospitals. My eyelids felt like they were glued shut. When I finally managed to pry them open, the world was a blurry mess of white ceilings and pale green walls. Mom, oh, thank God, you're awake. Sarah's face swam into view. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her hair a mess. She grabbed my hand, her own trembling dramatically. Mark stood right behind her, his hand on her shoulder, a mask of grave concern plastered on his face. He looked like a man who had been holding a vigil for days. We were so worried, he said, his voice low and somber. You gave us a real scare, Helen. They looked the part, the devoted daughter and the supportive son-in-law, terrified of losing their beloved mother. Anyone else would have seen a loving family reunited at a moment of crisis. But I saw something else. I'm her mother. I carried her for 9 months. I know every line on her face, every flicker in her eye. And what I saw wasn't genuine fear. It was a performance. Her grip on my hand felt less like a comfort and more like a prop. The tears in her eyes didn't reach the back of them. They were crocodile tears sitting on the surface for show. And Mark was overdoing it. His brow was too furrowed, his sighs too deep. They were laying it on thick. A doctor came in, a kind-faced woman who explained I'd had a minor stroke. A warning shot, she called it. They'd run some tests, keep me for observation. She spoke in calm, reassuring tones, and I watched my daughter and son-in-law nod along, asking all the right questions. Will she make a full recovery, doctor? Sarah asked, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. Is there anything we can do? Mark added. It was a masterful performance. They deserved an award. After the doctor left, they fussed over me, fluffing my pillows, offering me a sip of water through a straw. I was still too weak to speak much, my tongue thick and clumsy in my mouth. I let them play their parts, closing my eyes as if exhausted. It was easier than looking at them. It also made me a better audience for what came next. Thinking I had drifted off to sleep, their hushed whispers filled the silence. "Did the doctor say how long she'll be like this?" Mark asked. His voice had lost its somber tone. It was now practical, businesslike. "A few days, maybe longer for observation. They need to monitor her," Sarah whispered back. There was a pause. I could picture him glancing at the door, making sure no one was coming. "Okay," he said, his voice dropping even lower, so low I had to strain to hear it. "So, did you find out about the life insurance policy? With this happening, we need to know if it pays out on something like a stroke, or if, you know, it has to be the whole 9 yards. The air left my lungs. The beeping of the machine next to my bed seemed to get louder, each beep a nail being hammered into my coffin. The whole 9 yards. He meant my death. He was standing 3 feet from my bed, next to my daughter, and he was asking if my stroke was financially inconvenient for them. He wasn't asking if I would be okay. He was asking if I was dying the right way to get them paid. I didn't hear Sarah's reply. I couldn't. My mind was roaring, a white-hot storm of disbelief and horror. The concerned faces, the trembling hands, the tear-filled eyes. It was all a lie, a disgusting, elaborate play. They weren't waiting for me to get better. They were waiting for a payout. And in that moment, lying paralyzed in a hospital bed, I understood. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a walking, breathing, inconveniently still beeping insurance policy. Lying there, with the sound of their whispers still echoing in my head, I felt a rage so cold it burned. The shock had frozen over, leaving behind something hard and sharp. The loving mother, the frail victim, she was gone. In her place was a woman who had just heard her own daughter and son-in-law discussing her death as a financial strategy. They came back the next afternoon, bearing a cheap bouquet of carnations and plastic smiles. Sarah fluffed my pillows, her touch making my skin crawl. Mark stood at the foot of the bed, asking how I was feeling with that same fake, somber expression. They were resetting the stage, ready to perform their play again. But this time, their lead actress was off script. I stared at the ceiling, refusing to look at them. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "You seem distant." "I'm thinking," I said, my voice raspy but clear. "Thinking about what, Helen?" Mark chimed in, stepping closer. "The doctors say you just need to rest. Don't you worry about a thing." "I'm thinking about your conversation," I said, my eyes still fixed on a water stain on the ceiling tile. "The one you had yesterday, when you thought I was asleep." The air in the room went still. The cheerful bedside manner vanished. I could feel their sudden tension, a palpable wave of panic. "What? What conversation?" Sarah stammered. "Mom, you were out of it yesterday. The medication, the stroke. You were probably dreaming." "Oh, I was awake," I said, finally turning my head to look directly at her. I let my gaze drift to Mark, whose face had gone pale. "I heard every word. I heard you ask about my life insurance." Denial came instantly. "No, Mom, you must have misheard," Sarah insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "We were just worried about the hospital bills, that's all. We were talking about your health insurance." It was a clumsy lie, and she knew it. Mark, ever the strategist, tried a different approach. "Gaslighting. Helen, with all due respect, you've been through a major trauma," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "It's common for patients to be confused, to jumble things up. Your mind is playing tricks on you." I almost laughed. It was so textbook, so pathetic. They thought I was a doddering old fool. My mind is perfectly clear, Mark, I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. And my hearing is fine. You used a specific phrase. You asked Sarah if the policy would pay out for a stroke, or if it had to be the whole 9 yards. I let the words hang in the air. That disgusting casual idiom, the phrase that proved I hadn't been dreaming. Mark's composure shattered. He had no answer. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, caught red-handed. Sarah, however, fell apart completely. Her face, a mask of fake sympathy moments before, twisted into something ugly, a snarl of pure fury and desperation. She wasn't a concerned daughter anymore. She was a cornered animal. "So what if we did?" she spat, her voice low and venomous. "Do you have any idea how hard things are for us? The debts, the pressure? You sit here in your paid-off house with your savings and your pensions, judging us. You have no idea what it's like. So your solution is to wait for me to die?" I asked it, my own voice trembling with a grief that was deeper than anger. "To cash me in like a winning lottery ticket?" "You don't get it! You never get it!" she screamed, stepping right up to the bed, her face inches from mine. And then she swung. Her hand cracked across my cheek, a sharp, explosive impact that snapped my head to the side. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet room. My skin stung, a fiery bloom of pain spreading across my face. But the physical sting was nothing. It was a fleeting sensation. What truly hurt, what landed with the force of a physical blow to my soul, was the look in her eyes. There was no love there, no remorse, just cold, hard resentment. In the ringing silence that followed, I understood. That slap wasn't just about the argument. It was about years of perceived slights, of jealousy, of a daughter looking at her mother not as family but as an obstacle. The physical pain faded in seconds. The truth, however, would scar me forever. The bond between a mother and her child, the one I thought was unbreakable, hadn't just been cracked. It had been dead for a long, long time. I was just the last one to know. After the slap, there was a strange, hollow silence. Mark quickly pulled Sarah back, hissing something in her ear. She was still breathing heavily, her eyes wild with a fury that hadn't subsided. The performance was over. The masks were off. I just lay there, the stinging on my cheek a dull throb, my mind a complete blank. It was like my brain had short-circuited. They left without another word. The next day, they returned. There were no apologies, no tears, just business. Mark carried a thin briefcase, and from it, he produced a sheaf of papers and a pen. "We need you to sign these, Helen," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. He placed them on the rolling table over my bed. I stared at the top page. The words "durable power of attorney" swam before my eyes. I knew what it was. It would give them control over my finances, my property, my decisions, everything I had worked my entire life for, handed over with the stroke of a pen. Sarah stood by the window, her arms crossed, refusing to look at me. She hadn't said a word. Her silence was more damning than her scream had been. It was the silence of someone who had already written me off. A part of my brain, the logical part, was screaming, "No, don't do it. This is a trap." But that voice was small and distant. The rest of me was just numb. The fight had gone out of me. The slap had done more than just hurt my face. It had broken something deep inside. A tiny, pathetic part of me wondered if this was the only way. If I just gave them what they wanted, if I signed the papers, maybe the anger would stop. Maybe I could buy back a sliver of peace. Maybe my daughter would look at me again. It was a fool's hope, the logic of a prisoner trying to appease her captors. "It's just a formality," Mark said. nudging the papers closer. To help manage your affairs while you recover, so we can pay the hospital bills from your account. It makes things easier for everyone. Easier for you to drain my accounts, the small voice screamed. I ignored it. I took the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I looked at Sarah one last time, a silent plea. Please, just look at me. Tell me not to do this. She kept her back to me, staring out at the parking lot. I was on autopilot. I signed where Mark pointed. My signature a spidery, unrecognizable scrawl. I signed away my home, my savings, my independence. I signed my life away on a sterile hospital tray. When it was done, Mark gathered the papers, clicked his briefcase shut, and they left. The room felt colder than ever. The numbness lasted for an hour. Then the panic hit me like a tidal wave. What have I done? The full weight of my action crashed down on me. I had just handed the wolves the keys to the hen house. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I felt a desperate, clawing need to undo it. To talk to someone sane, someone I could trust. My hand fumbled for the phone on the bedside table. My fingers, still trembling, dialed a number I knew by heart. David. David Miller had been my and Richard's financial advisor for 30 years. He was more than an advisor. He was a friend. He'd helped us plan for retirement, celebrated our successes, and held my hand at Richard's funeral. He was my rock, the one person I knew I could count on for sober, honest advice. He was the voice of reason. He picked up on the second ring. Helen, I was so sorry to hear what happened. Are you all right? His voice, so full of warmth and genuine concern, was like a balm on my raw nerves. Tears I didn't know I had sprang to my eyes. David, I choked out. I've made a terrible mistake. Whoa, slow down, Helen. What's wrong? What happened? My words tumbled out in a frantic, whispered rush. I told him about the pressure, the argument, the papers. I didn't tell him about the slap. The shame was too great. But I told him I'd signed a power of attorney. I was scared, David. I didn't know what else to do. I cried softly. I've given them everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I heard him take a deep breath. Okay, Helen, don't panic, he said, his voice calm and steady. This is not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. We can look into it. The most important thing is that you're safe. I'll make some calls. I'll look into the legalities of reversing this, especially given your medical state. Just sit tight. Let me handle it. Relief washed over me so powerfully it left me weak. Oh, thank you, David. Thank you. Of course, Helen. That's what I'm here for, he said. You just focus on getting better. I hung up the phone and sank back into the pillows, my body limp. I had made a catastrophic error. But it was okay. David would fix it. David, my friend, my trusted advisor. He would protect me. I had just handed the second weapon to the enemy, and I didn't even know it. I was grasping at straws, and I had handed the sharpest one to the man who would use it to cut my throat. After the alarm, after the nurses rushed in and the doctor was called, after Mark was quietly but firmly escorted out of my room under a cloud of suspicion, there was silence. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence of before. This one was heavy, charged, like the air after a lightning strike. The storm had passed, and I was still here. I lay in my bed, listening to the reinstated steady beep of the monitor. Beep, beep. It was no longer the sound of a countdown. It was the sound of a heartbeat. My heartbeat. A stubborn, defiant rhythm that refused to be silenced. There were no more tears. I felt as if the part of me that was capable of crying had been cauterized, burned away by the events of the last few weeks. The shock of the phone call, the sting of the slap, the cold terror of the unplugged machine. It had all coalesced into something new, something hard and clear and cold. The woman who baked lemon cakes to feel closer to her dead husband was gone. The mother who pleaded for a scrap of affection from her daughter was gone. The frightened victim who signed away her life in a moment of weakness was gone. They had all died in that terrible silent moment when the beeping stopped. They were casualties of a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. Lying there, I made a vow, not with words, but with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. I would not be erased. I would not be a sad story told at a funeral, a convenient inheritance for a daughter who despised me and a son-in-law who tried to murder me. I would not go gentle into that good night. The gloves were off. They had wanted a fight to the death. Fine. They would get one. The victim, Helen, was dead. The warrior, Helen, was just opening her eyes. And the first thing a warrior needs is a weapon. My weapon wouldn't be a fist or a scream. It would be smarter, sharper. It would be the law. The next morning, when a friendly nurse came in to check my vitals, I gave her my first command. My voice was weak, but my tone was not. Could you please bring me a tablet with internet access and a pen and paper? She looked surprised but complied, returning a few minutes later with a hospital-issued tablet. My fingers, still clumsy, slowly typed into the search bar. Elder law attorney, estate litigation, Florida. I ignored the big, flashy firms with smiling, silver-haired partners on the homepage. I was looking for something else. I scrolled down until I found a smaller firm. The lead partner was a woman. Her name was Jessica Riley. Her photo wasn't smiling. She looked direct, no nonsense, and intelligent. Her bio said she specialized in cases of elder financial abuse and contested wills. She was a shark, and I needed a shark. I wrote down the number. I waited until the room was empty, then I picked up the phone. This call was nothing like the desperate, weeping plea I'd made to David. This was a business transaction. A receptionist answered. Riley Law Offices. I need to speak with Jessica Riley, I said, my voice steady. My name is Helen Porter. It is a matter of extreme urgency. There was a pause, then some clicking. Miss Riley is in a meeting. Can I take a message? You can tell her, I said, speaking slowly and clearly, that my son-in-law attempted to disconnect my life support last night to access my life insurance policy. You can tell her that my daughter, his wife, is complicit. And you can tell her that 2 days ago, they coerced me into signing a durable power of attorney, giving them full control of my assets. Tell her I am a prisoner in this hospital, and I wish to hire her to burn their world to the ground. Legally, of course. The silence on the other end was absolute. I imagined the receptionist, pen frozen over her notepad. Please hold, she finally said, her voice a little shaken. Less than 30 seconds later, a new voice came on the line. It was sharp, focused, and radiated competence. This is Jessica Riley. Mrs. Porter, start from the beginning, and don't leave out a single detail. And so I did. I talked and she listened, only interrupting to ask a pointed, clarifying question. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever. Power. The game had been set. The pieces were on the board. And I had just made my first move. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I had a sense of purpose. My daily calls with Jessica Riley were the anchor in my day. Her voice was a shot of pure, unadulterated confidence. We were building a case, brick by brick. I recounted every conversation, every threat, every lie. She had already filed an emergency motion to freeze my assets, preventing Sarah and Mark from draining my accounts with the power of attorney I'd so foolishly signed. The fear that had been my constant companion was slowly being replaced by a cold, sharp-edged strategy. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a fighter, planning my counterattack. I thought I was ready for anything they could throw at me. I was wrong. The next blow didn't come from them. It came in a crisp, white envelope delivered by a hospital administrator. He handed it to me with a look of professional pity, the kind reserved for people who are about to receive very bad news. "This is for you, Mrs. Porter," he said gently. "It's a legal notice." I took it, my heart rate picking up its tempo. I assumed it was their response to Jessica's motion, their lawyer fighting back. Let them, I thought with a grim sense of satisfaction. Let them try. I tore open the envelope. My eyes scanned the dense legal text. Petition to establish guardianship. Hearing to determine incapacity. Request for psychiatric competency evaluation. The words were a punch to the gut, but not an unexpected one. Of course, this was their next move. The classic playbook. If you can't get the money legally, declare the person incompetent and take control. It was disgusting, predictable, and I was ready for it. Jessica had warned me this might happen. I felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of validation. They were scared. They were getting desperate. I read on, my eyes searching for the petitioner's name, the person who had filed this vile document against me. I was looking for Sarah's name, or Mark's. I was preparing myself for the sick feeling of seeing my own daughter's signature on a paper designed to strip me of my sanity and my freedom. But her name wasn't there. Neither was Mark's. Instead, a different name was printed in clear, bold letters at the bottom of the page. A name that made no sense. A name that caused the entire world to tilt on its axis. Petitioner, David Miller. I read it again and again. It was like my brain refused to process the letters. David, my friend of 30 years. The man who held my hand at my husband's funeral. The man who had promised to help me, to protect me. The voice of reason I had clung to in my darkest hour. My blood ran cold. The paper trembled in my hand. This wasn't a counterattack from my enemies. This was a stab in the back from my closest friend. Suddenly, our last conversation replayed in my mind. But the words sounded entirely different. His calm, reassuring tone was no longer comforting. It was chillingly predatory. "Don't panic, Helen. Let me handle it." I thought he meant he would handle Sarah and Mark. But he didn't. He meant he would handle me. The penny dropped with the force of an anvil. I had called him in a panic, confessing I'd signed over power of attorney. I had told him everything. I didn't just give Sarah and Mark the keys to the kingdom. I had called the one man I trusted and told him exactly where the keys were, that the locks were broken, and that the queen was wounded and alone. And he saw his chance. He wasn't my protector. He was just a different kind of wolf. A smarter, more patient wolf in sheep's clothing. Sarah and Mark were driven by clumsy, desperate greed. David's betrayal was colder, more calculated. He had played the long game, waiting in the wings for 30 years. And my moment of crisis was his golden opportunity. The pain of this betrayal was infinitely worse than the slap. Sarah's violence was born of a bitter, twisted resentment I could almost comprehend. But this was the ultimate violation. He had taken my trust, the most sacred thing I had left to give, and fashioned it into a weapon to use against me. The warrior I thought I was becoming crumbled. For a moment, I was just a terrified old woman again, completely and utterly alone. Every pillar of my life had now been kicked out from under me. My daughter, my son-in-law, and now my most trusted friend. They were all circling. I wasn't just fighting for my money or my house anymore. I was fighting against a world where I couldn't trust a single soul. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I wasn't in a courtroom. I was in my hospital room, staring at a laptop screen. On it, a grid of faces stared back at me from a sterile conference room somewhere across town. There was a stern-faced magistrate, a court reporter, and 2 lawyers I didn't know. Then there was David, dressed in a somber suit, his face a perfect mask of sorrowful duty. And beside me, out of the camera's view, sat Jessica Riley, a silent, reassuring presence. This was my trial, a trial to determine if I was still a person, or if I had become a problem to be managed. David's lawyer went first. He painted a masterful picture of a confused, frail woman spiraling into paranoia after a stroke. He used my own words against me. He spoke of my delusional belief that my family was trying to harm me. He described my frantic, weeping phone call to David as a cry for help from a mind that was clearly unraveling. "Mr. Miller is not here as an adversary," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with synthetic compassion. "He is here as a friend, a loyal friend of 30 years who is terrified of what will happen to Helen if she is left to her own devices. He is taking this difficult, painful step for one reason only: to protect her." David nodded slowly, dabbing at the corner of his eye with a handkerchief. It was a sickeningly perfect performance. I could feel the magistrate's sympathy shifting toward him. I was losing. Then it was Jessica's turn. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear, "we are not here to dispute Mrs. Porter's stroke. We are here to dispute the narrative that a medical event has erased a lifetime of intelligence and sound judgment. I would like to call my client to speak for herself." The magistrate's eyes turned to my little square on the screen. "Mrs. Porter?" This was it. The gamble. I took a deep breath. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, much stronger than I felt. "It is true that I called Mr. Miller in a state of distress. I had just been physically assaulted by my daughter and coerced into signing away control of my assets. I believe any person in that situation would be distressed." David's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! These are unsubstantiated and slanderous accusations." "Sustained," the magistrate said. "Mrs. Porter, stick to the matter at hand. Your competency." "My competency is the matter at hand," I replied calmly. "My paranoia began when I overheard my son-in-law ask my daughter if my life insurance policy required my death to pay out. My confusion began when my trusted friend, after I called him for help, filed a petition to have me declared insane instead of a petition to protect me from my abusers. Is that paranoia, Your Honor, or is it pattern recognition?" The room was silent. I could see David shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Jessica spoke up. "Your Honor, Mr. Miller's counsel claims he acted only out of concern. I would like to submit into evidence a recording of a phone call between my client and Mr. Miller, which took place 2 days ago." David's head snapped up. His lawyer looked utterly bewildered. "A recording? We object. This is an ambush." "Florida is a 2-party consent state," Jessica said smoothly, "and my client will testify that at the beginning of the call, she explicitly stated, 'David, I'm recording this call for my own records. Is that okay?' And Mr. Miller, believing he was dealing with a confused old woman, agreed. We have his consent on tape." The magistrate leaned forward, intrigued. "I'll allow it." Jessica hit a key on her laptop. A small digital audio player appeared on the shared screen. She clicked play. First, you heard my voice, shaky and weak, an act. David, I'm recording this call for my own records. Is that okay? Then, his voice, slick with condescension. Of course, Helen. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. Then I began to panic, telling him I was scared of the lawyers, that maybe I should just give up. And David, thinking he had me, took the bait. His voice filled the conference room, not the voice of a concerned friend, but of a predator closing a trap. Now, Helen, don't you worry about the lawyers. That's why I stepped in. Once the guardianship is established, I'll handle everything. I'll make sure Sarah and Mark get a small allowance, enough to keep them quiet, and the rest of your assets will be managed properly, by me. For your own good, you understand. You're not in a position to make these decisions anymore. Jessica clicked stop. The silence that followed was deafening. The recording had revealed everything. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about cutting out Sarah and Mark so he could have the whole pie to himself. He had admitted it all. I looked at David's face on the screen. The mask of sorrow was gone, replaced by the chalk-white shock of a man who had just been publicly executed. His lawyer was staring at him, mouth agape, betrayed and humiliated. The magistrate cleared his throat. His tone had changed completely. It was no longer sympathetic. It was cold as ice. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I believe we have heard quite enough." I leaned back in my hospital bed, out of the camera's view. My heart was pounding, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was the thunderous, triumphant beat of victory. The gamble had paid off. The news of David's spectacular failure traveled fast. Jessica informed me that he had withdrawn his petition less than an hour after the hearing, his legal career likely in tatters. The immediate threat of a court-appointed guardian was gone. The silence from Sarah and Mark was absolute for 2 days. I imagined them scrambling, realizing their ace in the hole had just been exposed as a joker. Their trusted ally had tried to cut them out of the deal entirely. They were on their own now, and they were running out of moves. On the 3rd day, they appeared at my door. They didn't bring flowers this time. They brought desperation. They looked terrible. Sarah's face was pale and drawn, the dark circles under her eyes telling a story of sleepless nights. Mark's usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, hunched posture. They looked like gamblers who had just lost their final hand. They were here for one last desperate play, a Hail Mary pass called forgiveness. I had been moved to a different room, a step-down unit with less monitoring. I was sitting in a chair by the window when they came in, my strength returning day by day. "Mom?" Sarah began, her voice a fragile whisper. She rushed to my side, dropping to her knees and burying her face in my lap. Her shoulders shook with what were supposed to be sobs of remorse. "Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know what we were thinking. We were just so scared and desperate. We never meant for any of this to happen." Mark stood behind her, his hands shoved in his pockets. "She's right, Helen. We messed up. We messed up badly. The pressure, it makes you do stupid things. We were in over our heads, and we lost our way. We love you. We never wanted to hurt you." It was quite the performance. A few weeks ago, it might have worked. A few weeks ago, the sight of my daughter crying at my feet would have shattered my heart. But the woman she was kneeling before was not the same woman she had slapped across the face. I didn't say a word. I just watched them. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, not even pity. It was like watching a movie I had already seen 100 times. I could see the strings. I could read the script. Sarah's tears weren't for me. They were for her own ruined plans. Mark's apology wasn't for his actions. It was for getting caught. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry it hadn't worked. Sarah looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Please, Mom, say something. Please tell me you can forgive us. We can fix this. We can go back to how things were." Go back? I thought. There is no going back. Going back meant returning to a lie. Going back meant pretending I didn't know they saw me as a dollar sign, an obstacle to be removed. They were waiting for a response, for an argument, for tears, for a lecture. They were waiting for the emotional reaction they knew how to manipulate. They were waiting for the mother they had always known, the one who would eventually give in, smooth things over, and absorb the pain to keep the peace. But she wasn't home anymore. I looked down at my daughter, this stranger kneeling on the floor. I looked at her husband, the man who had tried to unplug my life. And I did something they did not expect. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a forgiving smile. It started small, just a slight upturn at the corners of my mouth. But it grew, spreading across my face, until it was a wide, brilliant, unwavering beam. It was a smile that didn't touch my eyes, because all the feeling was in my eyes, and that feeling was pure, cold, unbreakable steel. It was the smile of a person who knew every single one of their secrets. It was the smile of a person who had seen their ugliest truths and was no longer afraid. It was the smile of a person who had taken back every last ounce of power they had tried to steal. It was the smile of a winner. Sarah's sobs hitched in her throat. The color drained from Mark's face. They stared at me, utterly bewildered. This, they did not understand. This silent, cheerful judgment was more terrifying to them than any scream or accusation. They had come expecting a storm and had walked into a calm, bright, chillingly silent day. My smile never wavered. I just held it, letting it burn into their memory. I didn't need to say a word. The smile said everything. It said, "I know. It's over, and you have lost." After a long, agonizing moment, Sarah scrambled to her feet and backed away from me as if I were a venomous snake. Mark grabbed her arm, and without another look, they turned and practically fled from the room. I sat there, alone in the quiet, my smile slowly fading. I knew, with absolute certainty, that they would never forget it. I was discharged from the hospital a week later. Walking back into my own home, the scent of lemon and old books welcoming me felt like a resurrection. This was the place they had tried to take from me, the life they had tried to extinguish. But I was still here, and now I was ready to finish what I had started. People talk about justice as if it's a bolt of lightning from the heavens, a divine act of retribution. It's not. Justice isn't a gift you are given. It's a machine you build, piece by painstaking piece. It's methodical, it's cold, and it runs on evidence. For the past week, while my body healed, Jessica, Riley, and I had been building that machine. The foundation was the police report I filed from my hospital bed about the night Mark tried to kill me. The hospital's internal records of the alarm and Mark's subsequent removal from the premises were the steel beams. David's recorded confession, admitting he knew about their plot, was the wiring. My testimony was the engine, but an engine needs fuel. So we prepared what I came to think of as my letters of judgment. There were 3 of them. The first was a formal, detailed complaint to the state insurance board, outlining Mark's attempt to fraudulently collect on my life insurance policy. It included a sworn affidavit from me and a copy of David's incriminating recording. This letter was designed to destroy his financial credibility forever. The second was a carefully worded letter to the Human Resources Department of the large real estate firm where Mark worked as a commercial agent. It didn't make wild accusations. It simply stated that a criminal investigation was underway regarding his actions involving financial fraud and elder abuse against me, his mother-in-law, and that he had used his position of trust to gain information. It was a quiet, professional little bomb, set to detonate his career. The third, and most important, was the final package of evidence for the police detective in charge of my case. It contained everything: timelines, bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals they'd made, a copy of the power of attorney signed under duress, and a full transcript of David's confession. It tied everything together in a neat, undeniable bow. There was no grand ceremony. One quiet Tuesday morning, a courier dispatched by Jessica's office picked up the 3 envelopes from my doorstep. I watched the van pull away, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't gleeful. I wasn't vengeful. I felt like an architect watching her blueprints finally become a reality. The dominoes had been set up. All I had to do was wait for the first one to fall. I didn't have to wait long. Jessica had told me the police would likely act on the final evidence package immediately, that they would probably execute a search warrant at Sarah and Mark's house that evening. I didn't go there. I didn't need to. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, the one that caught the evening light. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene. I saw their rented house on the other side of town, the one with the manicured lawn they couldn't afford. I saw the streetlights flicker on. I imagined a quiet, dark sedan pulling up to the curb, followed by a marked patrol car, its lights off. In my mind, I saw 2 detectives in plain clothes walk up the driveway. I could almost hear the sound of their footsteps on the concrete. I pictured them knocking on the door, not a gentle tap, but a hard, solid, authoritative rap. Thump, thump, thump. The kind of knock that means the world outside your door has come to collect a debt. I imagined Sarah opening the door, her face a mixture of confusion and annoyance, thinking it was a late delivery. I saw her expression curdle as she saw the badges. I saw Mark appear behind her, his face collapsing when he realized the game was finally truly up. I imagined the neighbors peering through their blinds, the quiet hum of the suburban evening shattered by the words, "We have a warrant." I sat like that for nearly an hour, playing the movie in my head, until the phone rang. It was Jessica. "They're in custody, Helen," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Both of them. The police are searching the house now. The first domino has fallen." I looked out my window into the peaceful darkness of my own quiet street. The machine we had built was working perfectly. This wasn't the wild, chaotic vengeance my daughter had shown me with her hand. This was justice. Cold, calculated, and inevitable. And it had just been delivered to their door. In the days that followed their arrest, a dangerous quiet settled over my life. Sarah and Mark had been released on bail, a legal formality that felt like a personal threat. Jessica assured me the case against them was ironclad, that a conviction was all but certain. I had won the war of wits, of strategy, of law. And in my foolishness, I had made the fatal mistake of believing it was over. I forgot the oldest rule in the book. A cornered animal is the most dangerous animal of all. The storm rolled in on a Thursday night, a true Florida tempest. One moment, the air was thick and still. The next, the wind began to howl, throwing sheets of rain against my windows like handfuls of gravel. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the house into a deep, disorienting darkness, punctuated only by brilliant flashes of lightning. I wasn't scared of the storm. I lit a few candles, their small flames dancing and casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. I sat in my armchair, a book in my lap, listening to the tropical rage outside. It was almost peaceful. Then I heard it. Over the roar of the wind and the drumming of the rain, there was a different sound, a sharp, splintering crash from the back of the house, in the small sunroom. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the wind. The wind doesn't make a sound like shattering glass. It was the sound of a promise being broken. The promise of safety, of locks and walls. The sanctuary was breached. I didn't scream. My body went into a state of pure, cold survival. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, who it was. It was Mark. He had come to finish the job. My hand fumbled for the landline on the table beside me. I lifted the receiver to my ear. Dead. Of course it was dead. The power was out. My cell phone was charging in the bedroom, a room I would have to cross the main living area to get to. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling but steady. My eyes scanned the flickering darkness for a weapon. And then I saw it, leaning against the armchair. My cane. The simple wooden cane I'd been using since the stroke. I wrapped my fingers around its smooth, curved handle. It felt solid, real. Heavy, squelching footsteps were coming down the hall. I didn't hide. There was nowhere to go. I stood in the center of the living room, my back to the fireplace, and waited. He appeared in the doorway, a silhouette framed by a flash of lightning. He was soaking wet, his hair plastered to his skull, his clothes dripping onto my wooden floors. He didn't look like my son-in-law. He looked like something that had crawled out of a cage. His eyes, when the next flash of lightning illuminated them, were wild and empty of everything but a burning, bottomless hatred. "You," he spat, his voice a low growl that was barely audible over the storm. "You couldn't just die. You couldn't just let us have it. You had to ruin everything." He took a step toward me. "My job is gone. My wife, Sarah, she won't even look at me. We're going to prison. Because of you." "You did this to yourself, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I held the cane tight, its tip planted firmly on the floor. He laughed, a short, ugly, humorless sound. "No, you did this, but it ends tonight, the way it should have ended in the hospital." He lunged. He was fast, but desperation had made him clumsy. I sidestepped, bringing the cane up in a defensive arc. He grabbed for me, his wet hands closing around my arm. His grip was like iron. He yanked me toward him, his other hand reaching for my throat. I could smell the rain and the rage on his breath. I was no match for his strength. He was forcing me backward, my breath catching in my throat. But he had forgotten about the cane. As he pushed me, I let my arm go with the motion, swinging the heavy wooden handle around in a wide, desperate arc. I swung with every ounce of strength I had, every bit of fear and fury I had stored up for weeks. The cane connected with the side of his head with a sickening wet crack. He grunted, his grip loosening for a split second. It was all I needed. I twisted free, stumbling back and swung again. This time I hit his shoulder hard. He roared in pain and staggered sideways. He wasn't done. He came at me again, his face a mask of agony and murder. I didn't wait. I jabbed forward with the end of the cane like a fencer, catching him square in the stomach. The air rushed out of him in a whoosh. He doubled over, gasping. I stood over him, my chest heaving, the cane held high like a scepter. The storm inside my house was over, and I was the one left standing. The storm broke just before dawn. As the first pale light of morning filtered through the rain-washed windows, I stood on my porch, watching the last of the dark clouds retreat out over the ocean. The air was clean, scrubbed new. The police had come and gone, taking Mark with them. This time in handcuffs he wouldn't be escaping. The night of violence was over. My war was over. In the months that followed, the world righted itself. Mark was convicted of attempted murder, among other charges. He would not see the outside of a prison cell for a very long time. Sarah, charged as an accomplice to the initial fraud, took a plea deal. She testified against her own husband for a reduced sentence. I have not seen or spoken to her since she walked out of my hospital room with that smile burned into her memory. David Miller was disbarred and faced his own set of fraud charges. His name, once a symbol of trust in our small community, was now synonymous with disgrace. The machine of justice I had helped build had done its work, but their downfall brought me no joy. It was just a closing of a painful chapter. The real work, the healing, was a much quieter process. I sold the house. It held too many ghosts, too many memories of a life that no longer existed. I packed up the few things that mattered: Richard's books, my mother's china, my photo albums, and moved. I found a small condo right on the beach, just a few towns down the coast. Every morning, I wake up not to the beep of a machine, but to the sound of the ocean. The waves roll in and out, a constant, steady rhythm. It's the sound of breathing, the sound of life. It reminds me that every tide that goes out will always return. People used to tell me that your legacy is what you leave behind for your children when you close your eyes for the last time. I once believed that. I spent years saving, planning, building a nest egg for a daughter who, in the end, saw it not as a gift of love, but as a debt I owed her. That legacy died with the woman she slapped. So, I decided to build a new one. With the money from the sale of my house and the assets Jessica helped me recover, I established a foundation. It's called the Richard Porter Second Chance Scholarship. It's not for the brilliant students with perfect grades. It's for older students, people in their 30s or 40s who, like me, found themselves at a crossroads, needing to start over. It's for the woman who needs a nursing degree after a messy divorce, or the man who needs to learn a new trade after his factory shut down. It's a legacy built not on blood, but on resilience. I also picked up a camera. Richard had always loved photography, but I was always too busy. Now I have time. I walk the beach at sunrise, capturing the way the light turns the sand to gold and the waves to liquid silver. I take pictures of the weathered faces of fishermen, the laughter of children building sandcastles, the intricate patterns on a seashell. It taught me how to look again, how to find the beauty and the light in a world I thought had gone completely dark. It taught me that I get to choose what to focus on. The scars are still there, on my cheek, on my soul. They are a part of my story, a map of where I have been. But they no longer define me. They are a reminder that I survived, that I fought back. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I don't think about what I've lost or what I'm leaving behind. I think about what I am building today. I think about the student whose tuition I just paid, or the perfect shot of a pelican diving into the surf that I'm going to develop. That is the real inheritance, not the assets you pass down, but the light you create. Not the legacy of a sunset, but the legacy of a dawn. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.